Welcome to r/pro revenge, where OP screws his company out of millions of dollars. Our next Reddit post is from Texan Native. I left college with a business degree in one hand and no job in the other. And like so many colleges, the promises of alumni willing to give jobs to graduates could not have been further from the truth. So I had to seek out my start from the bottom. I found a pretty good job in operations at a company. I had a great boss who taught me pretty much everything I needed to know. Work was great and the money was good. I need to explain how the business works so you can understand how the plan worked. The corporate office was in California, but I didn't work in California. I started out working in operations with some of the smaller clients, but with some help from my boss, I was able to climb the ladder rather quickly to the point of being over all the operations and order processing for the firm. We had a very large client that was like 90% of the company's business. The way it worked was we had two sets of sales reps, TSRs and CSRs. TSRs were the heavy hitters who reached out to other big businesses and tech firms to extend their warranties on a product. They made real good money. The CSRs were more of the mom and pop crowd and the inbound sales calls for those that wanted to extend their warranties. A little while after I started, the client check portion was now going to be overseen by one of the sales managers. This is when things started going downhill. My boss at the time was given temporary access to the financials as they were hiring a new CFO and he had a background with it. We went to lunch like we'd done plenty of times before, but he seemed different. When I asked him if something was wrong, he told me that something looked off with our biggest client for one of the accounts. He wanted to make sure before he said anything to the higher-ups. While this was going on, I had been offered the chance to be our new compliance officer, which means I would need to make sure everything was on the up and up. Soon after, I come in to find out that my boss was just terminated for a multitude of reasons, all of which had to be untrue, because he was a pretty well-liked guy, and not just with the company, but with our client as well. As I log into my terminal, I see that before he left, he had given me admin access to his files. Here's where things started to pop off. It's kind of complicated to explain, but basically, my company was embezzling money from our biggest client. It was wild to see that this was happening, and something had to be done, so I hatched a plan. First things first, secure a new job because this won't be a fun place to work after this. Done. My previous boss knew of other companies that would scoop me up. I put in my notice and stated in my exit interview that I just couldn't be a part of what was happening, even though HR was in on this. I wanted this on the record. Next, I got approval for overtime for all the operations crew to come in on a Saturday, and pay them double. They arrived early Saturday, obviously not too thrilled as to why they were there. And when I explained that if they complete the task, not only do they get their overtime, but they also get nice bonuses, and they were much happier. They spent the entire day taking all the money that my company stole from the client and sending it to the client. We're talking millions of dollars. When all the sales reps arrived Monday, they were shocked as hell. Not only did they meet their weekly goals before picking up the phones, they made their monthly and quarterly goals too, just 2 weeks into the new quarter. Cheers, partying, yelling, screaming, celebrating, except for sales management. They went from being really excited to skeptical to confused to, oh no, in about 2 hours. They realized where this money must have come from. Because not only did the company hit all their sales, but since it had been over a day, the client came into work Monday to see a very nice payday in their system as well. And like anyone, they'd have questions. And the client said they were coming out to congratulate the team on such great numbers. So management starts scrambling because they can't figure out how this happened, and all under my boss's old login. On my last day, I arrived to the lobby. I've got my box for the last of my things. A guy walks up as I'm waiting for the elevator with me and we strike up a conversation. He notices my box and jokes about getting fired. And I just tell him that I have a great opportunity come up and I decided to leave before the poo hits the fan. We laughed. A really nice down-to-earth guy. He realizes we're getting off on the same floor. He asks if I work for such and such and I say yes. He asks where, and I tell him operations, and he reveals that he's the CEO of our client. Uh-oh! We go our separate ways. The client shows up and there's a big party. Afterwards, the client says that they would love to get a breakdown of where most of the sales come from so they can allocate more money to that department. Management says, sure, but it made up a lie about how they can't share client payment info due to regulations. Cue my exit from the company. 2 weeks go by and I get a phone call from a number that I don't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. When I get off work, I checked it to find out that it was the CEO of the client where I used to work. He's had something come up and wants to talk to me. Of course, I'm nervous as hell, but I call him back and he picks up on the first ring. And we get to chatting for a bit, and he finally just asks me, "Why'd you leave?" I tell him I had a great opportunity come up. He doesn't buy it and says that apparently my comment about poo hitting the fan really stuck with him, and he thinks something more is going on. So after a little more prodding from him, I tell him, just look at collections. That's all I can say. He thanks me and I hang up. 2 days later, he pulled the plug on the account. Apparently, my old company tried to threaten him with a lawsuit for pulling the account 3 years early. He replied with, "That's fine, because then I can show the courts that I have evidence that you committed fraud." Corporate came in and cleaned house. All the management was fired within the day. 1 month later, my friend and I had a very memorable trip to Vegas, all courtesy of our old client. Our next Reddit post is from Reddit account Throwaway. I was raised in a traditional religious household, and my beliefs didn't quite coincide with those of my parents. In fact, I didn't believe in God at all. I made the mistake of expressing my beliefs to my parents before I was out of the house, so they were constantly looking for ways to get me right with the Lord. This revenge story revolves around one of those attempts. When I came out as gay to my parents, they were less than understanding. As my mother sobbed about how her son was going to burn in hell and my father yelled at me for being so stupid, I realized I probably could have held off on telling them, but the damage was done. My relationship was never quite the same with them after that. Soon after my revelation, my mom took me to see a local pastor to clear my head and basically convince me to just be straight, which was clearly not going to happen. My father wouldn't be caught dead with me on this trip, however, because he was the mayor of our small town. And if word got out about his wayward son's feelings towards men, then his pride would be forever hurt and his public image ruined. After sitting through my pastor's awkward response as to why I should change my sexuality, I went with my mom back home. When we arrived at home, I was greeted by a living room full of my closest friends and family members with somber, pitying looks. Apparently, my mother had taken it upon herself to organize an intervention to instill religious ideals into me. When she sat me down and spoke to me in slow, careful words about how everyone here cared about me and was here to help me with my little problem, I was beyond mortified. I sat and listened as the people that I cared about in the world spat out Christian cliches and Bible verses telling me I would face God's wrath. When I finally was released to my room, I could barely contain my embarrassment and anger at my parents for humiliating me like that and refusing to accept me. I later figured out that my dad was pretty upset with my mom for telling people about my sexuality, but he eventually came to terms with it since all of them swore up and down to tell no one. However, I knew that he was really angry that his beautiful reputation might be ruined, not that I was emotionally dumped on. After this, my relationship never quite mended with my parents, but luckily I was already a senior and ready to go to college. I got accepted to a university pretty close to my hometown that was quite accepting and actually up to date with modern thinking, so that was good. I joined the college's campus pride club and became pretty involved in pride walks and events, and an opportunity presented itself to me that was too good to pass up. A pride rally was being held at my local town that I could attend, so I knew what had to be done. Now, just because I'm gay doesn't mean I dress in rainbows and tiaras all the time. But that's not what my parents thought. The stigma associated with being gay in my town was so exaggerated and homophobic that it was almost laughable. So I dressed up in the goofiest, shortest, rainbowiest clothes that I could find to really drive the point home. I got as many of my campus pride friends to join in the local rally as well, so the turnout was a lot bigger than expected for the event. When I finally got there, I walked all up and down the main streets, down my own block, and even past my dad's place of business and town hall. Since my hometown is pretty small, most people know each other, so I got plenty of scandalized looks and petty little gasps from people I'd met. But the cherry on top came when the local news station came to report on the event. Now, the reporters were technically interviewing random people, but I was more than a bit pushy in getting my own interview. I got to wave my flag, say my statements, and basically flaunt my sexuality on what would later become a brief report on the local news. I bet my dad enjoying seeing that broadcast all over town while sipping his morning coffee. As if this wasn't sweet enough, I actually saw my dad a couple of times during the rally. Since much of the rally was centered around town hall, it was fitting for the mayor to at least make an appearance, and he got a nice, good look at me. The look of disgust and almost fear at what had been done to his precious reputation is one that I'll cherish forever. After I was done doing my damage, I headed back to my college. Turns out, my dad did not get elected to office again that year, and even issued a half-hearted apology for his son's actions. Maybe next time he opens a Bible, he should read the chapters on love and forgiveness. Lord knows he needs it. Our next Reddit post is from Harpegist. Decades ago, I was backpacking through Europe with a friend. The trip started off great, but a couple of weeks in, we were in an overnight sleeping car on the train. While the other passengers from our room were in the dining car, my boyfriend tried to sexually assault me. First, I thought that he was joking, but he wouldn't stop no matter what I did or said. I fought. I begged him to stop. He kept telling me I knew I wanted it. He only stopped when the other passengers came in. I was in too much shock and disbelief to say or do anything after. I was in a foreign country, all alone except for him. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. I doubted myself. Was I overreacting? We checked into a hostel and left all of our belongings in a locker. We then went into town to explore. I timidly brought up the previous night. He gaslit me so hard, he almost had me believing that I assaulted him. I excused myself to go to the ladies' room. Then it hit me. I realized what really happened and how serious it was. So I got some revenge. I snuck back to the hostel. I told the hostel that we weren't staying after all, and I got a full cash refund. I got the refund for his spot too. They were fully booked, and our 2 spots were snatched up before I even left the lobby. I took our stuff out of the locker and left his pack sitting unsecured. I took all of our shared supplies, food, guidebooks, and the Thomas Cook train schedule book. This was before the internet. Trust me when I say that book was vital and expensive. I hopped the next train to the opposite end of Europe. Before I did, I made a quick international call to his mother, telling her what he'd done. It was worth every penny. I wish I could have seen his face when he realized I wasn't coming back from the ladies' room. And later, when he had nowhere to stay that night, no food, and no idea when the next train was. And then when he talked to his very angry mother. The one thing I didn't do was take his passports. The hostel was holding on to them, and they tried to give his to me when I checked us out. But I only took things that belonged at least in part to me. Why stoop to his level? Well, because he deserved it. I would have taken his passport and chucked it in a river. Our next Reddit post is from Valheru. Back when I was a teenager, my aunt would ask me to babysit her kids. It didn't happen often, so I really didn't mind, as long as she bought me pizza and her 2 children were well behaved. Anyways, she was a divorcee, and after a couple of years she remarried. His 2 kids were alright as well, and I didn't mind babysitting for them when they asked me to about 3 months after their wedding. This is when it starts going downhill. Firstly, no pizza. Second, they came home 3 hours later than when they said they would, and didn't give me a lift home. I was 16 at this point and a very big guy, so I wasn't worried about walking home, but it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Then they started to take advantage. Almost every week they wanted me to look after their kids for no pay. And they would get extremely pissy about it if I refused, often having a go at my mother, who would cry. I hated that. Fine. So they called me to look after their kids so they could go, and they do their regular, we'll be home by 10, but we mean 1 a.m. I say, okie dokie. I rocked up. Sure enough, no food aside from the kids' dinner. I raided their fridge. Then, at about midnight, I woke the kids up, took them into the lounge, and put on a video. They were a little confused, but excited to be up at that time. I then gave each of them a can of Red Bull and a packet of lollies. About 20 minutes later, the parents showed up and I left. They never asked me to babysit for them again. Apparently, they shouted at my mother, and my dad told me off, but he couldn't stop laughing, so I wasn't in too much trouble. That was r/pro revenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.